This session is about collaboration and innovation amongst smaller EU cities, and we'll be focusing on the topic of digital transformation, just as an example, really, of the sorts of topics that cities can collaborate around. My name is Trevor Gibson. I'm moderating the session. I'm the Smart City Lead for the City of Peterborough in England. My role is with an organisation owned by the City Council, but that delivers economic development or sustainable economic development for the city. We're a city of around 200,000, which in some countries would be regarded as a large city. In the UK is regarded as a sort of small to medium sized city, but I'll come on to that a little bit later. We've got an excellent panel, as you can see in front of you, and I'm going to ask them to to introduce themselves. We've tried to put together a panel that represents a whole range of stakeholders from investors to cities to the Covenant of Mayors and so on. So we hope for a really good discussion when we get to the end. And again, I'll say a little bit more about how we'll manage the discussion and question and answers shortly. So if I could turn to Annelies first and just ask you to introduce yourself, and also perhaps say what digital transformation in small cities means from your perspective. Just a very quick statement.
Yes, thank you, Trevor. Hello, everyone. My name is Annelies Zapper. I'm working for the region Thuringia in Brussels, in the Brussels office. And I basically help regional stakeholders from Thuringia to connect to European stakeholders, networks, and initiatives. And one of those stakeholder groups are cities and communities. And this work with this stakeholder group started basically with organizing a workshop in 2019 together with other colleagues from different Brussels offices. And the workshop was especially designed for small and medium-sized cities to inform about EU funding opportunities, to support experience exchange, and to develop cooperation project. And since then, I'm dealing more or less with small and medium-sized cities in Thuringia, but also on EU level.
Thank you, Annelies. Neil, you're next on my screen, so I'm going to turn to you.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you very much to the organisers for inviting me to take part. My name is Neil McCarthy, and I'm the CEO of Crust Technology. We build the Cortesa low-code environment for delivering enterprise-grade applications and digital transformation. Cortesa is used by many of the world's largest organizations. What does digital transformation to small to medium cities mean to me? I think above all, it means being practical on every level. The goals we want to achieve in common are actually possible, but we must also be realistic about our limitations, both collectively and locally. There will always be this trade-offs between the things we can and cannot do. And through all of this, we must also consistently serve the people who make up our cities. Secondly, it means standardization of how we manage data. This is more or less common sense when the volumes of data under management expand exponentially. Thirdly, readiness must be a core goal. I think everyone knows that COVID has highlighted how quickly things can go wrong. As a result, there's now this general awareness that our information infrastructures need to enable us to step right or to step left efficiently and without fuss. Physical infrastructure takes time and planning to build, but new data emerges every single day of our lives. And it is this marriage of informational and physical infrastructures that makes up a smart city, and therefore a starting point for many conversations.
Thank you, Neil. We'll return to some of those topics later on in the discussion. Frederick, you're next on my list. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Trevor. So Frederick, I work for a network of local authorities called Energy Cities, and I'm coordinating the office of a European initiative called the Covenant of Mayors. So very briefly on the Covenant, before responding on the digitalization. It's a bottom-up movement launched 12 years ago. We have 10,000 municipalities of very different size, big and small, that are taking giant steps for mitigating climate change, adapting to the effect of climate change, and also alleviating energy poverty. So as an office, we try to promote a multi-stakeholder, multi-level governance approach. And having limited capacities, we also try to team up with other initiatives, and particularly European initiatives such as the Smart Cities Marketplace. Hence this concrete collaboration today with my participation to this webinar. And obviously, digitalization has a key role to play in the decarbonization of local authorities. So that's why I want to exchange today, get some feedback from the participants, and with the other panelists trying to find some and suggest some approach to that for local authorities.
Thank you, Frederick. Matteo, last but not least, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Trevor. Matteo Andretti. So I'm an investment partner at the Smart City Infrastructure Fund, which is a privately funded investment platform that is seeded by European pension funds to invest in smart city projects. And the back of what we do is in a small to medium-sized community, because that's just a reflection of probably our demographic across the continent. Just to pick on one particular statistic of a country that is close to my heart, Italy, we have 85% of the population lives in a community that have less than 10,000 people. So that's already mentioned, and I think leaving 85% of the population behind in terms of like having access to digital innovation is just a non-starter from an inclusion point of view, economic growth, and as well in terms of fighting major challenges that we have in terms of like change in demographics, but also climate change, as mentioned by Frederick. I mean, the whole everything that we do, it's about creating a future-proof digital infrastructure. So for us, it's very important that whatever we do is actually being scalable and it's also evolutive, because it's one thing to have to learn about digital is that it will constantly change. And last but not least, it has to be open access to promote genuine cooperation among different players. And these are also elements which are, for us, are very important as well, no matter what the size of the system is, whether you're coping for a city of millions of individuals or 10,000s.
Thank you. Thank you all for those introductions, and thank you for keeping them brief. For my part, I just have a few slides to share, which, if the system works, I commented earlier that it's looking at the dashboard feels a bit like being a DJ, which is I'm far too old for. So hopefully you can see the slides welcoming you today. We've already met our esteemed panel. And it's a very tight schedule today, as you'll find as we get a bit further in. We've got a total of an hour, so we need to finish at 3 o'clock. Within that, we want to devote as much time as possible to discussions, taking questions from the floor. And as you can see in the chat, Vanessa has put there the instructions for how to post a question or indeed ask to speak, and we will manage as many of those as we possibly can. I just wanted to give a little bit of background to what we've called the Small Giants Initiative. And the first thing I should say is that this isn't about replacing any of the existing networks, fine networks that already exist. And you heard from Annelies, a very successful one already existing in her region that she coordinates. And it's about pulling together those existing networks and building them, if you like, the small giants we see as being a network of networks but focusing really on the collective power, as you can see on the slide, of smaller European cities where, as Matteo described in relation to Italy, it's actually where most people live, not just in Europe, but around the world. But it's often easier for governments and larger businesses to focus on the larger places in each country. So this is about finding ways of designing for small, sharing solutions, aggregating demand, and scaling up. So rather than scaling down from large city solutions to actually building things on a small but replicable and scalable method. Earlier on this year, with support from Annelies and others, we undertook a bit of informal research with small to medium-sized cities across Europe in a range of countries. It involved the completion of a very short 6-question questionnaire. You can see a screenshot of it on the slide. And also I did several, I think about 5 or 6 in the end, interviews with mayors in many of these cities who were really keen to speak about this subject. So there's certainly a great deal of interest out there. There were many positives that people working with and governing small cities saw in being small, and they're fairly obvious, but it's worth just showing a few of them on the slide there. You know, people valued the cultural value, the links with their rural hinterlands, the fact that they found collaboration in their cities very easy because they often knew everybody that needed to be involved, sometimes outside work as well. So it was a really powerful message that came through about that ability to collaborate within a city. A city of short distances, which I thought was a really nice phrase, that people, residents, businesses can reach all of the things that they need over very short geographic distances and time. That the ecosystems, because of the small scale innovation and economic, can be very interwoven, quite tightly interwoven, and comprehensive as well. And the networks that have been created in those cities are seen as very strong and resilient. There's also a good point that in small cities, things that would be a pilot in a large city can actually be transformational in a small place, because you can cover a much larger area and a larger population and test things on a whole city scale. And collaboration does take place quite extensively sometimes with neighboring cities and so on, or around a particular theme, out of necessity. But it wasn't all good news, and I think these are some of the things we want to pick up on when we get into the discussion sessions. The challenges are clearly on a different scale and are often in a different context in small cities. And a message that kept coming out from certainly the interviews I did was that small places with those challenges find it very hard to be heard by the national and international policymakers. They're seen as one of many, and the group is almost too big to engage with. So there is a sense that they feel left out of being able to influence some of the things that affect their city. Being small places as well means there's a small workforce at the heart. So there's often a lack of experience and expertise in some areas. Simply sometimes just finding resources to put together bids for funding is lacking in areas, and sometimes connections with some of the critical partners also lacking as well. A lack of critical mass. Smaller places find it very difficult to attract or be seen as first in line with larger companies, research institutes, and so on. Some of those things are almost prerequisites of some funding routes. And as I mentioned earlier, solutions developed for large cities are often not very relevant to small cities. It's possible in some instances to shave bits off the edge of the solution or break components off it and try them out in smaller places. But they've often been built for much more complex and larger systems, and downsizing them has proven quite difficult. So as I mentioned before, an ideal for small to medium-sized cities would be scalable solutions built at that local level. ironically, in a way, COVID-19, I heard this directly from mayors in some of the cities. COVID-19 is driving a move from urban environments to more rural environments. So it is a very real topic now that the smaller cities, smaller places may well grow. They'll still be small in the scheme of things, but it will become increasingly important for a larger proportion of the population. And I guess what this session is about, really, positive action to help cities across Europe and beyond find that voice. The final part of the survey we did basically looked at some of the themes that are challenges and are of interest to cities. And you'll see them set out on the left of the screen. Circular City is something that's very close to my heart and something I work on in Peterborough. But today we're focusing on digital responsiveness, digital transformation, just really as an illustration. And we hope beyond today's event that we'll run small workshops on other themes and try and build that collaboration. So the outputs from today are really about building a momentum for and on behalf of small to medium-sized cities, gaining a clearer understanding of the benefits of collaboration, what is needed to drive such collaboration, and what can stakeholders, such as the sectors represented by our panel today, what can they do to help achieve this? So that's where we are in terms of just a little bit of background as why we thought the session was necessary. I'm going to close that now and go back to our fine panel and ask. I'm going to basically kick the ball off by asking a question, but again, as I mentioned earlier, it'd be great to hear from the audience out there. So please post your questions in the chat or raise your hand on the other side of my screen to seek to ask a question, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. I'll just pick one up before I ask a question there, which is something I actually meant to say. That's a question from Gloria in the chat about the range and size of cities. This was a debate we had right at the outset of this initiative, which has been running for some years now, very informally, about, should we set a limit, a lower limit and a higher limit? It became very difficult because, as I've said, what's regarded as a small city in one country might be regarded as a slightly larger one in the context of another country. So it is different in each country that from our experience. We decided in the end that cities sort of know that they're small to medium size, and that this is more about ambition. It's about a desire, an ambition, a will, a leadership that wants to collaborate around the challenges that are going to make life better for their citizens. So rather than have a very specific number or set of numbers, we decided it was more about ambition. And if a city considers itself to be small to medium sized, then this is perhaps a place where they can find that voice. So there are a few more questions coming in, but I'm going to ask the panel first of all, while people think about questions they might want to ask. I'm going to ask the panel, how do we get big cities and industry to think small, to help these smaller cities find that critical mass and move forward, increase the pace of change in their cities? I'll throw that open to Neil first.
Thanks, Trevor. I guess while I appreciate the nuance in the question, I don't believe we should be trying to get big cities and industry to think small at all. I believe we should be getting them to think big, but in less monolithic or traditional ways. As has been mentioned a couple of times, small and medium cities are where the majority of Europeans live. That is a big number of people, both politically and economically. Therefore, enabling technology transfer and best practice transfer at scale is key, I think. Given the timescales for success that we all face, I don't think we actually have another option. Smart city technology should be developed by all parties so that it is reusable in many contexts and so that it strictly adheres to standards in particular.
Thank you, Neil. That's really useful. I like the turning my question on its head in a way, but I think that's exactly right. It is about that scalability, thinking big, but making the solutions applicable across a whole range, rather than having a variety of solutions to similar or the same challenge, for different size cities. So I think that's an important point. Matteo, I'm going to come to you next, if that's.
Thank you, Trevor. Well, let me, there are several probably answers to that, but let me try to maybe focus on the financial one, which is probably one closer to my area of activity. Clearly to me, the key is to be able to develop a scalable business model. If you think as well at the revolution that happened when the mobile phone came into our society, which is not a long time ago. As we know it, the value of a mobile phone is so long as you can remain connected wherever you are. So not only in a big city, but as you move throughout the country. I think the same reasoning does apply as well for digital services and digital solutions. They have no barrier. So to some extent, the big cities should understand that it's in their best interest to be able to create a business model and system that are interoperable and compatible as well with neighboring cities and municipalities, which may be smaller one, because otherwise it's a sort of like a house of cards, and the whole sort of system can go down. But then again, when we think about it, a big and small city, we shouldn't underestimate as well the advantage that the small cities have in terms of having a linear decision making, and most likely as well higher level of leadership. So these are also very. I think we should sort of like leverage on how agile small municipalities are to be able to proactively contribute without being seated at the same table as the big city to come up with these business models. Again, I think it's all about having a robust market proposal that then the private sector can embrace and the public sector can regulate, as they've done historically on other essential services.
Thank you. Yeah, and that again, as I mentioned in my presentation slides earlier, there was a really strong message from the small cities around exactly those points. So again, really relevant about getting the larger cities should already be thinking that way and moving towards interoperability, which is a phrase that I hear quite a lot, but often even within a city itself becomes quite difficult, where systems don't speak to one another. So thank you for that. I'll come to Annelies next, if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, I agree to many things that Neil and Matteo already said. For me, I think it's really about the people. So when we think about or let me put it another way, the smaller the city, the smaller is the pool of resources they have. This is what you presented in your slides as well. So it's about infrastructure funding, but it's also the pool of human resources. So when we think small cities often don't have the access to universities or to the academic or to innovative hubs. And young people leave to bigger cities. So the pool of innovation capacities in smaller cities is much harder to access. And people in City Hall or in city administration, they deal with a range of topics at one time, and there is not much time to have, to work on visionary steps like digital transformation, and they are in smaller projects. And so basically what I mean is, I think we really, this scalability is one thing. Sure, we need scalable solutions, but we also have to see that smaller cities just have different resources. So it's like a chef de cuisine having to cook on a camping cooker, you know? So I think we do need to realize this and to hear what smaller cities need, and give them complexity reduced solutions to do this, but also give them the access to this experience, like you said, Neil. Since they don't really have it, or not as much as bigger cities, they need an easy access to a capacity, innovation capacity pool. And one thing too is that I want to mention as well is that I think smaller cities, as you mentioned before, Trevor, they have a good cooperation structure within their cities. They have informal relations to their people, to the citizens, to the companies, and so on. So within the city, normally the cooperation works quite well, but it's also kind of a atmosphere of trust. So I think this is what smaller cities need more than bigger cities, where you have, you know, more self-confidence because you have bigger resources. You need them to have a trustful way to get in exchange with others, so they can use this pool of experience, for example, in exchange with other cities, also on an interregional scale. So basically, I say, yeah, we do have to ask ourselves if the scalability is everything, or if we do need also different tools. And one very important thing is the trust issue.
Okay. Could you just expand on the trust issue a little more, or very briefly, just what you meant by that last comment?
Yeah, I think imagine you have not so much an experience in cooperation, or you cooperate with your inner city, and now, and you know, I can call Trevor anytime, or I can just pop by and ask the question. So now you go on a bigger scale, or with a big city, for example. There, you come to more formalized processes within city structures. So you have higher hierarchy, you have different resource, you don't know the people, and it takes a while to, you know, to get your cooperation partners and to get an understanding of each other, and to see how can you work with each other. So, and this is when you are having a big capacity of small projects, or, you know, your capacity is not very high, then to engage in cooperation projects, because in your small city you have enough on your plate, then it's, yeah, this is an issue that is hard to overcome when you're not this type of person who just wants to go for it and wants to cooperate and wants to innovate. And there I come back to this innovation capacity thing. We also have to see public administrations in cities. They often don't have the most outgoing and innovative human resources. It's public administration. Let's be honest with each other. It doesn't mean it's bad. Okay. It's just a certain kind of way.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Frederick, could I come to you for your comments on the question?
Yeah, thank you. just to make a transition with what Annelies said, I think it's probably easier to be a chef de cuisine in a big city, but much harder to be a chef d'orchestre and get everyone together. And it's something that small and medium municipalities have more facility to put in place, whether it's under a formal structure or informal, because people know each other. We had a masterclass between the Covenant and the Smart Cities communities recently, and one of the main outcome was that there is no there is no size of project which is too small. So in that sense, my reply to why big cities should also, and industry should think small, is that because big cities, they cannot implement, and you said it, Trevor, in your introduction, they cannot go full scale and have the whole city making a transition. They need to have some pilot districts where they can implement, whether on a sector, which can be, well, energy, which is something I'm very much interested by, mobility, or something else. But also on the game changer they can use, on the system changer they have. So that can be governance, that can be digitalization. So they need to test different things. And they would probably, or it's easier to do it at a smaller scale. Then, and this is also, I mean, what Matteo said about Italy is also what we see in the Covenant of Mayors community of signatories. I mentioned the 10,000 municipalities. Well, if you look into the details, 90% of those 10,000 municipalities are below 50,000 inhabitants. So, of course, we have the Stockholm, Paris, Amsterdam, but we have plenty of small towns, not to say villages, that no one knows about, even Matteo in Italy, because we have plenty of Italian municipalities into the Covenant, that want to make this transition. So they definitely need a lot of support. And we also see a lot happening in terms of cooperation between big urban areas and rural areas around villages, around energy, around food. So all those local chain of production of different things that are very relevant and are part of the transition that we need to put in place. So to me, it looks like I understand the difficulty of the scalability of those approach, but there is, let's say, a market for that. That we need to provide a solution, and I fully support the issue of the capacities of those smaller towns and cities that needs to be supported through different means, bundling projects, energy agencies or others, but also the national governments that should come up and provide support to that. Because very often what comes from Brussels and from EU initiative is targeting the big ones. And you also put it in your slide, Trevor, and this is a trend we need to change. And I think, I mean, again, from Europe, we should change that and ensure that the smaller ones are also getting their bunch of technical assistance, money, because that, I mean, they are the place where citizens live, and they also need to make the transition.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And again, some commonality there across the comments, and also some useful challenges. I think one of which is picked up in the chat there, a comment or a question really from Christian Holst, building on the discussion, I guess. I'll read it out, but I think most people can see it anyway. I wonder whether scalability is really an answer to the problems mentioned. Large cities have embarked on digitization for quite some time, and the result is a plethora of different IT environments that are often hardly compatible. What should small cities do to leapfrog this development instead of repeating it? So I guess that sort of gets to the heart of the problem, and we've covered it in some of our responses there. But do people want to just make a very quick comment based on Christian's last point about what small cities need to do to avoid that repetition or reinventing the wheel, as we often call it? Yeah, Neil.
Hi. So, you know, there are different ways of interpreting scalability. everything from horizontal scalability to vertical scalability to a bunch of other things. I think in this instance, the only way we achieve a commonality of interests is through standardization. And making sure we adhere to data standards in particular. Those silos, that plethora of different IT environments that you refer to, Christian, that can exist in harmony as long as the standards that underpin how you manage your data are actually enforced, implemented, adhered to, etc.
Thank you, Neil. Does anyone else on the panel want to comment on that question? If not, well, yeah, Matteo.
Yes, no, Trevor. I can only echo what Neil mentioned about standardization of solution. But then I think we can't ignore as well, let's call it the fixed cost, whether it is a human capital required to develop a project or just working capital that needs to go in terms of like in getting a new solution off the ground. So next, I would put very next to standardization as well the concept of aggregation of demand and clustering of projects. I mean, it's inevitably, if we're talking about a smaller municipality, and I do agree based on what we see actually all across the world, that probably the most dynamic project come actually from the bracket to the 50 to the 200,000 type population for communities. This is really where innovation is driving up. It's not in the big cities, it's where things get done. But in order to do that, you do need as well to find a way which is linked as well in the sense of like public essential service, finding an effective public procurement tool that can allow this municipality to come together, go to the market, and being able to draw on the best competence that they see on the open market. So it's a concept of standardization, clustering of projects, and then of course the elephant is the room. How can we make it happen? So it's linked to the procurement tool.
Thank you. Any other comment? Annelies, did you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a good question how to do this. And I just wanted to give an example of one of our Thuringian very small towns who told me that to build like an app to better communicate with their citizens, they didn't even use a company. They produced it in with the resources they had. So friends, people who didn't charge anything for it, but they worked after work on the program. And so I think it's not the first thought within small cities to have a look outside first. But what they do is they look in their camping equipment, what they have, and then use it so that the solution they need works somehow. And maybe this is one starting point to motivate them to, before they start doing something by themselves, to give them something where they can look for it. Okay, maybe there is there are already solutions available that they can adopt for their city, and not only to look like in the neighboring town or city who don't have a solution yet either, but to look on national or European level for smart city solutions.
Okay, thank you. There is again looking at the chat. There is support already for the idea of an innovation or capacity pool. Muriel Pels there has said that was critical in the making of the Iris Lighthouse project. So there's obviously things we can learn from existing projects about how that could be constructed and put together. Again, just encouraging the audience, please post questions as we go. There was one earlier that I didn't want to miss, which I think we've now covered in the conversation, which was I'd mentioned about the fact that small cities, small places had a lack of expertise and experience, and the question from Muriel there is about in what areas those were missing, and I think that's goes back to the conversation we've just had, really, and some of Annelies' comments in particular, that we're talking about very small workforces here, and so that lack of expertise and experience can be almost in any area. But I think digital transformation, because of its fairly obvious technical nature, is probably an area where there is need for that additional expertise and support if one is to put together credible funding bids and so on. So we'll move on to we'll move on to my second question now. Again, the inevitability of these sort of free discussions is that we start to cover the answers to another question in responding to the previous one, but I'll ask it all the same, because I'm sure there are things that the panel can add and the audience can add, and that's we've talked about that need for collaboration, and we've started to talk about some of the potential solutions to help drive and support that collaboration. But the question is simply, what do small cities need to collaborate effectively? And I can feed in some of the comments from the survey later. But again, I just wondered, building on the comments we've already heard from the panel, is there anything that you would like to add from your experience? Again, Frederick, you mentioned your masterclass earlier with smart cities and many small cities represented on that. Was there anything that came out of that masterclass about those needs, what those cities needed to collaborate?
Well, there was indeed a clear also outcome was the need for empowering and building capacities of local authorities, and particularly the medium and small one, around digitalization. I think here I'm probably the only one that is not an expert of digitalization. And I find it difficult to sell. I mean, this is not something that there are a lot of detractors on the impact of digitalization on our life. The fact that it can increase the gaps between those who have the knowledge and those who don't, those who have the possibility to invest and those who don't, between big and small, everything that we also talked already about. So I think there is a need for demonstrating the added value on different sectors. Again, I'm on the covenant, we are focusing on the climate and energy transition, but to show that there is an added value to use those digital services to improve what the local authority as a local government can offer to their citizens, and how those tools or technologies are supporting local authorities and not instrumentalizing them, because there's often this type of feeling by at least some of the cities we're working with, or some citizens. So I see an importance into communicating about good practices that we see and how digitalization has been supporting the climate and energy transition, or another one, social integration, economic development, and so on, for small and medium-sized cities. And then, building the capacities of the few people that work in a local authority. But I like what Annelies said. It's like also, and this is where the small cities have an advantage, trying to do it yourself. So empowering the cities to have the capacity to involve the stakeholders. And just an example, I know the city of Leuven would not be considered as small for some of us. It's below 100,000 inhabitants. Of course, they have a big university and everything, but they got the capital of innovation in 2021 or 2020. Why? Because they had a very specific governance model through an NGO that was created and putting everyone together, the academy, the local government, the citizens, and so on. So that is something that is, again, easier to do in a smaller than in a bigger city. And we should just give the capacity to cities to organize that. And then the competences would come, not only from the local administration, but also from citizens that are working for a startup or working in the industry sector in another place. So again, I very much believe in that. So offering the capacity to cities to better collaborate and be the chef d'orchestre of their community.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really a good point there about the governance model and what a difference that can make. Because I often think as well that in cities, people tend to look to the municipality to solve all the problems. And in many instances, climate change is a very good example. It can yes get to grips with its own carbon footprint, but in other areas it can simply be an influencer. So I think looking at those governance models and sharing that leadership, if you like, across a range of stakeholders, I think would work for many of the themes we've covered. Neil, could I turn to you for comments on that question?
Sure. So I think I'm probably going to end up echoing a little bit what Annelies, Frederick, and Matteo have all said. From my perspective, a city is a local economy, and the officials that run it are elected locally. So when it comes to collaborating effectively, the platform, therefore, and the digital transformation they adopt must serve their local interests firstly and their local reality firstly. Otherwise, it tends not to get off the ground. You don't get buy-in that comes in. So, for example, we should not be attempting to divorce our ecological and our public health goals from our economic goals. In a small area, these things are intermeshed. So therefore, at a local level, these things need to be aligned, at very least from a budgetary perspective, but of course from other things, so social inclusion, etc. All of these things are impacted by us not thinking rather horizontally about the set of problems we face. Once we move then sort of to a national or international level, how we architect the data layer becomes central to the conversation. We need to be able to federate and share standardized data and insights at scale while respecting data protection laws, data privacy laws, and the data sovereignty of any organization or indeed any nation. And then lastly, while this sort of federated and shared data should be immediately useful, it should not impose one local context on another local context. For example, it should not impose rules for how data is used from one context to another, or for the same, you shouldn't impose the same reporting formats, because different local contexts have needs for different reporting formats. Likewise, you shouldn't be imposing identical graphical user interfaces, etc. Things just stop at that point. They're not transferable, and that local context, all that valuable local community you're trying to create, just disappears if you start enforcing that on people. So these federated data layers and sharing data layers must respect the decision-making sovereignty of every small city and always work according to this golden rule that operational knowledge and data can really be very different things. I think if we succeed in creating operational and decision-making sovereignty for all small cities to view, report upon, and create whatever processes they require for their local context, while at the same time harmonizing their data layer relationship with other cities, then we will create this most effective form of collaboration. And it goes back to Christian's question earlier, when we talk about scalability in the collaboration, really that begins with how we share that data in a standardized way, respecting all of our laws around data privacy, protection, data sovereignty, etc.
Thank you. That's a really useful insight. And just to pick up a point that was made earlier, I think by Frederick, I'm not a digital specialist either, so it's useful to have someone like Neil with that perspective on the panel. Annelies or Matteo, do you want to comment on that question? Have you anything to add to what we've said already? Annelies?
Yeah, I would like to make 2 comments. One is it's really interesting also to see how Neil is arguing, since he's already into the technical implementation, which is great. And as you explain it, it seems very logical to me and a good idea.
Please don't tell my wife I was arguing again.
But my thinking, and I do everyone who's not very much into digital transformation, the expert, I'm coming from a step before where I think, how do I first of all get cities to start the talk of collaboration? So not the actual operation or the process, but what do they need? I think what they need is a common challenge, which doesn't need to be digitalization. I think that the digital transformation is really, as it was said before, it's just a tool to help to implement better solutions in cities in different application fields, health or city engagement or decision-making processes, etc. So I think if smaller towns or cities have one specific or have a specific common goal in one of the application fields, they come together once they see that this can bring something for them in short or medium term. And so this is one precondition for an effective collaboration, this common challenge. And the trust issue, as I said, so you do have to get used to network outside your region or your city. And then just the skills factor again. So how do I get, how can I access a skills pool, but also this skills development? I think we didn't talk about this yet. How do we get city administration employees to have a better digital skills? To understand when they are talking about solutions for processes.
Thank you for that. And just glancing across at the chats, I can see that a colleague and friend, Dr. Jackie Taylor, is agreeing with Neil, and also starts to talk there about the education space and the outcomes that have been achieved there across cities, not just across schools, and also some helpful, again, supportive comments from Muriel Pells about the experience on the Lighthouse projects, which I'm sure we can capture and take forward. I'm going to, I know you've not all had time to comment on that question, and I'm keeping both eyes now on the ticking clock at the top of my screen, which says we've got about 3.5 minutes left before we need to wrap up. So in the absence of other questions from the floor at the moment, I'm going to ask my final question and just ask the panel to sum up, if they can, in a couple of sentences, your hopes and fears for digital transformation in small cities over the next 5 to 10 years. So as briefly as you can be, please, but I think it's be a nice way to close. So I'll do it in order, reverse order on the screen. Matteo, do you want to comment first on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me start with my biggest fears. Is that the lack of coordination could lead to closed systems, and I think that would kill innovation rather than stimulating. So absolutely, that's probably my biggest nightmare, and I encourage everybody on this panel to think about open systems. But then in terms of like my biggest hope is, what we show on this panel, is that collaboration and cooperation and blending of public and private competence can actually produce outcomes, whether it is done at project levels or sort of like association levels, all sort of different. So it's, I think there is, and when I'm talking blending, it's not only financial, because of course the financial task is higher than every single government or group of country can cope. We're talking about trillions, but also from a human capital and leadership point of view.
Thank you for that. Frederick, could you briefly sum up your thoughts on that question?
No, yeah, my main concern will be our capacities as EU initiatives to, again, to provide the relevant support to local authorities across Europe. I mean, this is something we are struggling on a day-to-day basis in the Covenant of Mayors for our climate and energy transition. So how do we manage to organize between a multi-level governance that really puts the cities, whatever their size, into this chef d'orchestre position where they can really mobilize, engage their citizens, their businesses, their academic institute into a transition to increase the well-being of citizens. And for me, as Annelies rightly put it, digitalization is a supporting element to that. The goal should be to make life of citizens more, beautiful and sustainable and healthy and so on. But for that, we need really to place the cities as the chef d'orchestre of this transition.
Thank you. Neil, last word from you on the before I go to Annelies.
I'll go at speed then. So like Matteo, I'll start with my biggest fear, which is that we go back doing our own thing and the data-driven craziness in particular of the last decade. Therefore, my first big hope is we find a common path, because we must find one. I've already highlighted that I believe that is in harmonizing our approach to data management and the standardization around that. I also hope we all understand that digital transformation lays the foundation for innovation. For the most part, digital transformation is not innovation itself. So in short, we need to walk together before we can run together. And then innovation, then it drives economies locally and nationally, driving the cost of forward-looking, standardized digital information transformation we should be trying to drive it as close to zero as possible. And that should be a major goal. And then by being inclusive of the needs of small cities and their local economies to grow, we will actually rewrite the rules of the game and best enable our cities to thrive over the coming decade.
Thank you. Some really good thoughts there. And finally to you, Annelies, any comments on that final question from you?
Well, when I look into the future and what challenges are laying ahead of us with climate neutrality, green transition, demographic change, everything, sustainability, digitalization, and I see it in front of the resource pool for small and medium-sized cities. Especially when I look in my region, I fear that this is overwhelming, and sometimes that the small scale solutions will not be enough. It needs a change of thinking in addressing those challenges, and that might need more time than cities have. But on the other hand, my hope is that really with better cooperation, as it was mentioned by the other speakers, they will find a way, and they will find a way to use their camping equipment and maybe make some more.
Yes, that analogy will stay with me long beyond the session, Annelies. Thank you for that. There's some good chats going on the right-hand side of your screen about open data. We haven't got time to cover that there. And then the last comment I can see is a question of scheduling, in that there's a digital twin session happening simultaneously, which I think takes twinning to a whole new level, given that it's simultaneous. So with that in mind, and looking at the clock, we're slightly over 3 o'clock. So I'd like to thank Annelies, Neil, Frederick and Matteo for their input today. I think we've had a really good discussion, and the outputs from this we will take forward, and we'll continue to push for that collaboration. There's been lots of really good suggestions today, which I think will help us with cities, with Annelies in particular, to just refine how we do that. So thank you everybody for your input, both the panelists and of course those of you that registered and joined the event. So I'll leave you in the capable hands of the operators now to move you into other rooms. But thank you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.